talk to you about like
that I can borrow on.
I don't understand. I'd like to welcome everybody here. This is just a wonderful turnout. We're all so very happy to see you. And welcome the Thompsons, and hope that we have a fun interchange evening this evening. And I want to tell you a little bit about what's happening next month. We are having Dr. Eula, who is the historian from Genesee County, and he's going to put on a two-part workshop for us on family history. How many people here have done family history? Quite a few of you. But one of the things that he is really thinking hard about is how to get people to do the family history and get it in a folder and get it in some kind of a book so you can hand it down to your children and grandchildren. And so this is not just going to be a lecture, but it's going to be a hands-on workshop. And if we have this many people in the room, I don't know how we're going to do it, but you're all invited, because this is a very exciting kind of thing to do for each family, right? There's nothing better than talking about your grandparents, your great-grandparents, etc. In fact, I've got a little story that I've already told Rob this afternoon on the phone. So I'd like to invite you all to that. All of the materials that we will need are being presented by Genesee County History. And there are books that he will have, and there's going to be a lot of important information disseminated there, and I think we should have a lot of fun. We need to make it fun. And remember, anytime you get to talk about yourself and your family, it usually is fun, as long as you don't tell too much. And that one is going to be April 25th, right here.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. And then, let's see, the week, or the next month, and I don't know if I have the date correct, let's see, the date is the 23rd of May. We are having a woman who is a professor from Cuyahoga College. And what she does, her name is Melinda Gruber, and she takes on the persona of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And I don't know if you can see the picture. Can you see the picture at all? She gets, if you've ever seen the pictures of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she has this big, huge black dress, beautiful, it's got ribbons on it, and it's got a little lace collar. Well, she has a dress just like that, and she puts this dress on and has her hair fixed, and she becomes Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So in the half hour I was talking to her on the phone to get this started, I said to her, well, you know, there are a lot of issues with women these days that are in the news. And she's a very proper lady, and she said, oh yes, I know. We've been talking about all of these things in my classes. And I said, well, is there any way that you can kind of work this into your talk? And she said, oh, Elizabeth Cady Stanton had a lot of ideas about family, personal relationships, sex, and etc. So we just howled laughing, and I think that you'll have a really good time if you come to this one. And I think you'll have a really good time if you come to the section on family history also. So, right now I'd like to introduce to you Rob Thompson and Mrs. Thompson, and they're here from Attica, New York. Rob has authored 13 books, including 4 bestsellers, and I don't know if I'm going to do this well, so From Hell, The Final Days of Jack the Ripper. You get the theme. The Linden Murders Solved, The Twisted Tree, The Final Word on the Linden Murders. This is it Mauthausen?
Mauthausen.
Mauthausen.
Yeah.
And what's that one about?
We visited Austria last year, and give you a little background on that. We were at a signing about a year and a half ago, and I was talking to a young man about his Civil War book, and I casually mentioned the Holocaust, and he asked me what was the Holocaust.
Oh.
So we visited Austria, and we visited the Nazi concentration camp outside of Vienna called Mauthausen. So it's on the camp.
Okay. He will release 2 books in 2018. The 105th New York, the story of the LeRoy Regiment, and the USS, the Sullivans Weekend with George, must be George Washington, and he holds a master's in English Lit. He's a member of Sigma Tau Delta English Literature Honor Society, is a member of the Charles Dickens Fellowship, right up our alley, all of this stuff tonight, right? And the Ernest Hemingway Society, my husband loves that.
Yeah, he's my favorite.
Oh yeah. Rob spent 12 years working as a mental health caseworker in one of America's largest cities before returning to his home in western New York, and he was born in Livingston County and raised there. And he married his high school crush in 2007, promised to show her the world, and in 2015 they went to Brussels, Belgium and they were there during the terrorist bombing. So he has plenty to tell you.
I've seen the world.
Boy, they live in Attica. And what I want to say is that you may, at the end of this talk, or even as the interaction occurs, say something about the Linden murders that happened, or a rumor that was in your family. I know that there is one person here who has a tremendously interesting history that her mother-in-law wrote, and she's ready to tell us about that. But if there are other stories, I know Rob would love to learn about them, and we would all love to hear about them. And without further ado, so I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you for inviting me and us.
It's
I'm
our
glad to be
absolute
here.
pleasure.
I would prefer to sit, but if you all want me to stand, I'll be happy to stand too. I'm the world's worst public speaker. You'll find that out shortly. The last time I gave a talk was at the Rotary Club in Batavia 8 years ago. And a guy I happened to meet was Bill Brown. And most of us would remember Bill Brown. And he was telling me about a book he wrote, The Linden Murders and Unsolved. So that's how I came up with the name for my first book, The Linden Murders Solved, was with a little encouragement from Bill Brown. How many here know pretty much a lot about the Linden murders? Okay, I'm in trouble. All right. How many have never heard of it? Okay, a couple, okay. I'm going to give just a little background on it, and if y'all want to add in some feedback on it to maybe correct me, but there were six unsolved murders that took place in Genesee County between October of 1917 and May of 1934. I'd first heard of the Linden murders from Kendra because her sister lives in Skatesville Road, just right around the corner from London. I'd never heard of it, you know. I'd written books on the Buffalo Bills, novels on Jack the Ripper, and this, that, and the other. I said, what's the Linden murders?
Could you talk a little louder?
Okay. So I started doing some research on the Linden murders, and I go down to the historian office here in Batavia, and they said, oh yeah, we got boxes of stuff. I said, okay, boxes. I thought I'd get through it in a half hour and go home. So I go through the first box, and there's 6 case folders. This material, is from what I've been told by the historian, was maintained by District Attorney at the time, James Kelly. He kept all the information in one box. These were most of his materials. Those murders were the 1917 murder of an unknown woman named Ruth. There's somebody here that might know a little something about Ruth. Her body was found behind a big barn on Route 63 in Bethany Center Road, and I've been trying to find the owner of that barn so I can get behind there and snoop around. It was in the same case folder as Frances Kimball, the first victim in Linden. She was 70-something years old. She died in October of 1922. There were 3 victims in March of 1924. Tom Whaley, Hattie Whaley, and their neighbor who co-owned or owned the Morris General Store, Mabel Morris. There was a murder in Attica in 1934 on Buffalo Road. Benjamin Phillips. Some of you may have been familiar with Ben Phillips. He was a one-armed farmer who had a nasty temperament. His neighbor happened to be the man I had named as the murderer, who relocated from Linden 2 weeks after the triple murder to a farm, to a small house on West Avenue, just 2 miles south of where the 1934 murder took place. I have a cheat sheet to work off because I've forgotten a lot of this stuff, or tried to remember it so much over the years. So I'm going to kind of work off a cheat sheet. I had no idea that there was going to be this crowd. So we only have 15 copies, so if you really want one, or share one, or
Really like them,
pair
let
off
me
in a
know.
team or something, we'll
We never expected this to be people.
no way.
I'm thankful, very
yeah,
thankful
thankful.
that you're all doing
You'll find out too that I tend to get on a tangent.
it.
Like tomorrow's opening day for the majors, and I love the Pirates, and they're going to have a terrible season. They really are. They have nothing. If they had a third baseman and two pitchers, they'd be all right. When I started going through the box of materials, and I'm not kidding you, there were photographs, and I brought some photographs here with me tonight. I left some of the more unfamily-friendly ones at home. But there were materials probably this thick of trooper statements, of not witness statements, but interviews done by troopers with the citizens of Linden, doctor statements. So what I did was I separated all that. I put it over here. And coming from a mental health background, I'm kind of analytical in a lot of ways, so I set it over here. Then I had a stack of rumors I heard over the years about who actually committed the murders. And I heard rumors like, well, it was my best friend's cousin's uncle's nephew's neighbor who committed the murders. It was a stranger who had a pirate leg and came in from Buffalo on weekends to murder people. I had all kinds of rumors. One name that came up again and again and again was Gideon Kittle, a neighbor there in Linden, the Kittle family. So I took that, and I considered him my prime suspect because his name kept coming back again and again and again. I threw out all the rumors because writing nonfiction, you can't rely on rumors to write nonfiction. It's good for fiction and novels, but when you're trying to put something together, a historical timeline, you cannot rely on rumors and speculation. So I went with everything that I knew that was solid, and that was the statements by the troopers, and notes kept by District Attorney Kelly and the other district attorneys at the time, and the crime scene photos. So from that point, I started building a case from the ground up, and when I started out, there were 24 possible suspects that I wrote down. 24. Any idea how you think I eliminated some of those suspects?
Age. Elimination.
Age. And what?
Process of elimination.
Right, pretty much process of elimination. I looked at the natures of the crimes. They were blitz attacks, all of them. Blunt force trauma from the back with either a rock, a sharp instrument, or a sharp instrument. That couldn't have been done by the 70-year-old guy who ran the train station, or a woman. There were a couple of gentlemen in town. I'll pass this photo around. I'll start with you guys and you can just... This group is called the Gandhi Dancers. It's a group of railroad people who worked on the tracks in Linden. I circled one face on this, and that's Tom Whaley. He was a victim in 1934, or 1924. The man I named as the killer is also in this picture. They worked together on the railroad. Where was I? I asked a question. What was the question? Process. Thank you. I go to bed around 8 o'clock, so about 20 minutes from now, it's going to be tough. I'm going to talk fast. But it was really looking at the crime scene photos. And I know it's disgusting in a lot of ways, but that's what I had to do. I looked at the faces of Ruth, the woman found behind the barn, Bethany Center. I saw the damage done to her face. I looked at Frances Kimball and I read the coroner's report saying that she had been hit in the head 12 to 20 times with a rock. The victims in 1934, both Tom and Hattie had been shot. Mabel Morris had been crushed. fought with an axe handle. In this photo, you can see that an axe handle was found next to the bed in 1924. That wasn't a murder weapon, by the way. It hadn't belonged to Tom. It was just an axe. So I said, okay, all these crimes have a similar MO, modus operandi. Somebody knows what that is, right?
Yes.
How the crimes were committed, method of carrying them out. Blitz attack, quick attack, from behind. So he surprised his victims in each of the cases. The signature of the crimes were the same. You familiar with what the signature of the crimes are? Overkill, yes. Why did this assailant, it's overkill, what was done above and beyond the act itself? Why did he set fire to 4 of the 6 victims? He put 3 of the victims from 1924, he rolled them up in a carpet, poured coarse kerosene over them, set them on fire. Why did he do that? Benjamin Phillips in Attica, 1934, blunt force trauma to the head. When he was found the next day or 2 days later, the shades had been pulled, the doors had been locked, the same way they had been in Mrs. Kimball's house, in the 1924 house. He was found in a position like this on his bed with a little tin cup of kerosene. He'd been set on fire. The signatures all matched. I believe he would have set fire to all of his victims from 1917. The young woman's, and some of you who've read the material and one I'm looking forward to talking to here afterwards, her body was found in a shallow ditch, shallow grave, and was covered with branches. Was that meant he was going to come back later in the day and set fire to it? Mrs. Kimball, 1922. Her body was stuffed in her basement under some wood and doors. I believe he was going to come back that night and burn the house down. No way to prove that, it's just a theory. Based on the 4 other murders that had taken place, just based on the history of his signature, I believe that's what he was going to do. Any questions so far? Any comments? Anything? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. That's a good one. I'll go back to, well, those of you who had a copy of this, a clinical tool I used when I was in the mental health field is called the Hare Psychopathic Scale. On that scale there are 20 issues that you look for, that I looked for in a client. Were they glib? Did they have history of arson, petty crime, animal abuse? Some of the issues may differ, but those were the things I looked for. And I'm taking a circular route back to your question. The man I named as a murderer, his name had come up again and again in interviews with troopers. And I said, wow, okay. Why does he keep coming up? I go down here to Bethany Courthouse, Town Hall Courthouse. And I said, did this guy ever have an arrest record? Yeah, you know what? 1911, he was arrested for animal cruelty. He hit a cow so hard it knocked the animal's eyes out. Okay. And the woman who filed the complaint was the 1922 victim, Frances Kimball. So now it's coming together a little bit. That's what I did when I saw that. When I read that he had the animal, I go, oh, wow, okay. He also had set fire to his cider mill, reportedly in 1915 for the insurance. He owned a cider mill in Linden. History of arson, animal cruelty. There's another little chart we use called the Evil Triad. It was called bedwetting. The three legs of that tool was bedwetting, animal cruelty, and arson. And this guy had satisfied 2 of them. how am I going to prove that he wet the bed as a kid? So 2 out of 3, talking baseball, that's a 666. He's in the Hall of Fame as far as I was concerned. So anyway, I went down this scale, and I graded my suspect on each one of these categories. I don't have my glasses, so I'm going to lengthen my arm. Lack of remorse, shallow affect. Let's go to lack of remorse. When Mrs. Kimball's funeral was being held, he was asked, did he go? He said, no, I don't like dead people. That was his answer. Okay, all right. Sexual issues. Most of us are of a proper age. There were reports that he had engaged in activity with some of his animals. That was another key thing that satisfied one of the issues on here. Irresponsibility. He had 4 kids, no regular job. He was cutting wood for a living. He was living in a home once owned by his mother. So was he financially responsible? I don't know. Right now, at that point when I graded him, I gave him a 1 out of a possible 2. Juvenile delinquency, I had no way of knowing that because nothing is known about the man when he was a kid. Until next year when I come out with the next book, then you'll know all kinds of things about him. That's going to be called The Cider Maker, by the way. Cider Maker. Grandiose sense of self-worth, yes. I have that. Okay, I wouldn't be standing up here telling you how I solved this. But he really had an inflated sense of self-worth. That I never did anything wrong. I'm the victim. Everybody's out to get me. Mrs. Kimball, she had no right to report me to the police, so I'm going to crash her head in with a rock and stuff her into the basement. Tom Whaley, the victim from... There's a picture floating around with a circled face on it? Okay. I'm going to delve a little into that. Let's go back to 1923. It was after Francis Kimball was killed. Well, there's a fire in Linden. The justice of the peace who had found my suspect guilty, well, his house caught on fire. And Tom Whaley and those guys on that Gandy crew, the little train crew, they were on the tracks watching him cross the field with a kerosene can. That's in their statements. That's in that pile of stuff that I went through at the Historical Society, or Historian's Office. Tom goes home and tells his wife, Hattie. Hattie was known to spend more time doing this, and she did that. Okay? Some of that got back to a woman named Jane Lyons, who lived in Linden, and who employed Andrew Michael on the morning of March 11th, 1924, to cut some wood. My theory was she told him at that point, you know, there's 2 people in this town who know you killed Francis Kimball, and they're Hattie and Tom Whaley. The kicker is, Jane Lyon was Tom Whaley's sister. They were related. And the theory, and you'll see it in the second book, The Twisted Tree, how I glued the pieces together went this way. I believe she told the suspect I named, if you're going to kill them, you got to make sure you kill Hattie first. Otherwise, I wouldn't inherit the estate. So he went into the house, killed Hattie first. That way Jane would be receiving what was the estate, which was essentially the house. And he killed Tom second. Mabel Morris. I didn't bring it. I would have brought a lot of stuff for you guys. That's Frances Kimball. She was killed in 1922. She's the one that filed the complaint against my suspect for animal cruelty. So I found just in the evidence in front of me, the material in front of me, a history of arson. The cider mill, Maurice Nalen's house, and now he's setting bodies on fire. Okay. The night of the the triple murder. I was pretty sure I had the right guy, but something was going like this. I just couldn't prove anything. You know, I wasn't happy yet. It's like when I would sit with a client, I say, I know this guy is lying, and he's just a BS artist from step one, but I can't prove it. Once I found out where my suspect was staying the night of the triple murders, I knew I had the right guy. I'm going to circle this and pass this one piece of paper around. He was staying less than 50 yards from the back door of the house, which happened to be his mother's property. He simply walked out the back door of the Whaley house behind, let me see that top picture. I'll send this one around too. Behind this corral, which is at the tracks in Linden, and into the back door of his mother's house. He was home in less than 5 minutes. That's why I believe somebody saw him. But that's how he got home. Now, police reported, the troopers there, reported finding a bloody dress when they searched the house. A bloody dress. I said, okay. Was he in a dress? No. He was staying with his sister, Julia. I'll give you that much. I'm not going to give you the guy's name. Some of you might know it, but I believe he came in the back door, went up to Julia, and said, I'm home. That's how the dress got bloody, because it was her dress. She runs across the street, goes in with the family across the street. He sets himself in the house and would not answer the door when the troopers came knocking. He sat there in the dark. What was missing from the Whaley's house was a piece of ham. I believe he sat there and had a ham sandwich after he went home. What they said was missing from that house was a ham. Yeah, yes, sir.
So was Mrs. Morris just in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Yes and kind of no. I'm sure that answers your question satisfactorily. But, and I didn't bring that one either. At the end of early February 1924, the suspect and his family had been evicted from their Mill Road home there in Linden. He then moved into that house there at the tracks. His family moves first to Alexander, then to West Avenue in Attica. While he was staying at that house in Linden, he receives a note from the Morris store saying your credit's been cut. Signed George and Mabel Morris. So he's looking at a time, he's lost his house. He's got a baby on the way, by the way. I found that out researching a new book, that there was a baby on the way.
That's the guy that
And he's lost his credit. He has no money, no job. So revenge, anger. You looking for motivation? There it is. Plus you factor in, I believe he was a psychopath. Not mentally ill, but a psychopath. And going back to this scale, you can reach a high of 40. I scored him at a 30 out of a 40. That's without knowing what he was like as a kid. I don't know if I'd want to know him as a kid if this is how he acted as an adult. But so I believe he was a psychopath. So whatever he did, he didn't care. 2 weeks later, within 10 days, let's say, and I'm going to be off by a day or two, he moves to Attica. He gets a job at Westinghouse, and he would work for Westinghouse for on and off 20 years. I have not been able to prove that one way or the other, but he worked at Westinghouse. And at that time, Westinghouse was making the stokers, something that would, and somebody who might know better than what a stoker is, I believe a stoker looks sort of like a lawnmower blade. Right or wrong, kind of, maybe? Let's just agree with me and say it kind of looks like a lawnmower. Anybody watch the movie Sling Blade with,
Yeah.
that's what I believe happened to Benjamin Phillips in 1934. Is he took some of the material from Westinghouse, and that's why he killed that man. With a piece of metal right to the back of the head. Going to 1934. He's living in Attica. He's been under constant surveillance by the state troopers and District Attorney Kelly and the subsequent DAs ever since the Linden murders. In a letter I found, DA Kelly said, I know who the man is, I can't prove it. well, why put somebody under surveillance if he's not the guilty guy? Nobody else was under surveillance. The Kittles weren't. Myron Smith weren't. Nobody else in Linden was. This one guy was. A lot of the citizens from Linden, such as the Kittles and the Chaddocks, moved to Attica, and this guy was right behind him. Now, a lot of people have asked me over the years, how come you think it wasn't solved? Who was going to say anything about this guy? Who's going to come out and say he did it? Because they would have been next. The picture, man, how do I do this without giving it away? Who's got the picture of all of them on the railroad tracks? Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll say it. There's only 2 known photographs of the suspect. Both times he's wearing gloves. They bring him in for questioning in March of 1924. They said, can you fire a .32 caliber pistol? Well, the man was deformed in his hand. He had an oversized index, so he couldn't pull a trigger. In the very next piece of paper I found, they asked him about his brother's .32 caliber rifle, and he says, I haven't fired it since December. So that's what I did too. I go, He can't fire a .32 caliber pistol, but he can fire a .32 caliber rifle. Inside the Whaley house. I'll pass this around. This is inside photo of the Whaley house in 1924. They were found all over the floor, .32 caliber shells. Pretty good.
What was the reason he couldn't fire a pistol?
He had a deformed right hand, oversized. And that's why I think he wore gloves too.
I didn't catch that.
Sir, was they the 2 people that were shotguns?
Yeah, Tom and Hattie. He went in, surprised Hattie. She was at the sink. Tom was in the pantry. I believe he kept him in there like a trapped dog. He knew Tom was bracing the door, and in one of the books, I include a photograph where you can see the powder burns on the door. And that's how he shot Tom. Yeah, go ahead.
Question about firing a gun. No one heard anything? I'm familiar with Linden. It's not that big.
Right. The train was coming through at approximately 6:30, and I think that was the time the murders took place. Somewhere between. Yeah, absolutely. He worked for the railroads. He knew what time the train was coming through. He knew what time the guys got off work, what time Tom Whaley went home. He knew how he could dodge in front of the train. He knew how long they were going to be at the depot. Even without the whistle, a train makes a lot of noise just sitting there, just idling. 7 o'clock at that night, a lot of people were out of the house because they were supposed to get together and listen to music on the radio. Down at the store. I'm going to pass this around. I'm getting on a tangent. So let's say that filing cabinet back, the brown one, or green, I can't tell, was the Whaley house. Across from the street, catty corner to it, was the Chaddock home. Let me point something out to you. The front porch of that home faced the door directly, the front door of the Whaley house. D.A. Kelly believes the suspect walked out the front door of the house, walked around the side, behind the corral, into the back door of his mother's house. I believe somebody was standing on that porch and saw the whole thing take place. And I think it was Mrs. Chaddock, the young Mrs. Chaddock. So there was a witness. So the troopers go up to this Mrs. Chaddock, I can't remember. Said, did you see anything? She said, no. I'm pregnant, I can't deal with this. They moved to Leicester, like a week later. So I get into Ancestry.com, I do it. Guess what? They never had a baby. 1924, 1925, or 26, no baby was born. Why tell that lie? Okay, she could have miscarried. Something could have happened. I don't know. Sounds like they wanted to break camp and they got out of there quick. Any questions? Yeah, a couple.
How old was he when the murder started and when they ended?
And how old he was?
How old was he and when they all started in 17?
Well, I'm operating off the assumption that that was his first. I don't think it was, because no one could, in my opinion, could have done that amount of damage to an individual without a lot of practice. I'm starting to trace him back to Michigan. That's where some of the family came from. To answer your question, I think he was around 33 in 1917. Yeah, and so he was getting older, as we see a lot of these serial killers, and of course he was a serial killer. The older you get, you tend to slow down, but you don't necessarily stop. So that accounted, to me anyway, the gap between 1924 and 1934. But I don't think that was his first. Yes, sir.
You can establish motive for Trimble and the other three. What's the girl on 63?
Good question.
Motive there?
Glad you brought that up, because I would have forgot to talk about it. In 1916, and I think it's in the second book, The Twisted Tree, there was a news story that came out in the Batavian newspaper that's saying, my suspect was returning from Michigan with a bride. There's no listing, again, I'm back into Ancestry.com, no listing of a bride. Could that be his first wife? Now, there was a dispute going on with the family, with my suspect's family and property. His father had just passed away not long ago. All his other brothers were reasonably responsible, homeowners, family men. They were getting the bulk of the property. Did he have to set out to prove that he was just as good a man as everybody else and bring home a bride? And when Mom didn't like her, she ended up in the field in Bethany Center Road? I don't know. We'll never know that. But because Kelly kept them all in the same case, in the same file, I believe he saw a connection. And whether I'm just taking it a step further, based on a newspaper story saying he was bringing home a bride, could that be his bride? Maybe.
How old did they think Rose was?
Wow, that's good. If some of you have seen the pictures, you can't tell, even after reconstruction. So my guess is anywhere between 20 and 25. And there was some severe damage. Anybody? Yes, Sandy.
You said at one point in time that Justice Nealon thought he was guilty, or
Oh, he found him guilty.
of what?
Animal cruelty. Yeah, he was a justice for Linden, and yeah. So again, that factors in the revenge that I'm going to set fire and burn everything down. And it was only the bedroom part of the house that burned, just like Benjamin Phillips in '34, and like the Whaley house. Did I pass around? This is a picture of the Whaley house here. The only room that was burned, and I got a nastier picture up here, I'll show you if you want to see it, was the bedroom. So in 3 houses, it was only the bedroom that was set on fire. Now, being a mental health practitioner in the back, I watched the movie Burning Bed. You know, was there an oddball relationship between him and his mother? Would that account for him feeling he has to satisfy her? I don't know. So you see all the puzzle pieces I had. I said, okay, this guy's a psychopath. He likes animals. He sets fires. He burns this. Yes, Sandy.
So I think something, I'd like to reiterate something you said, because somebody moved away.
Right.
And then he actually moved away.
Right.
But there's a whole family here that's sitting here with the great-grandchildren on the floor here, who have a grandmother who lives in Linden, right by the tracks.
Okay.
And she was the town crier, like, and she had the first household in Linden. And she was the one that called into maybe whatever the name of the newspaper was that gave all the news. And she also wrote a diary, a page a day. And what happened around the time of this 3-murder sector was that she said, we have had a lot of trouble up here.
Yeah.
And I always laughed and thought, why would she not say anything? But it's clear, they didn't want to die.
Right. Everybody knew it was him. And I believe you told me tonight I can have that diary for the next 6 months. Is that what you told me? You didn't say that? Okay. It's bad self. But getting on it, with Francis Kimball's, this house here. This is the Kimball property from 1922. If you go to the Holland Land office, you'll see some cut phone wires. Well, those phone wires were cut. But my question, and I don't know Wasn't there party lines back then? Who else lost phone service at that? Did the whole town go out? Was it?
We're all part of it.
Not necessarily, depending upon where it was cut.
The phone line?
Yeah. So enough, if it wasn't cut up on your poles.
Right on the house.
Right on the house, it just eliminates that house.
Just, okay, all right, very good, thank you. Now I know that. So if I put that in the book, delete it like that.
Another great aunt.
Yes.
Mabel was the mother's great aunt. And you remember the haunted building, the asylum? The old triangle?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
That's Raymond Road. And you go up there, it's East Road.
Right.
Well,
You said Mabel was your aunt?
my mother's great aunt.
Oh, really?
Can you
And they lived on,
whatever's happening over there?
Sure.
right up on the corner there, of the Western Road. So they were only about 3 miles from Linden.
Okay.
So it's, everybody had the theory. But if you looked at the land office, gruesome things there was real hate there. It was more than just a killer. I think it was, and then there were you had 3 ways of ways, but those were hated. You had to know they were human beings to see them.
Right.
They're that bad.
The suspect would have had to know the properties, would have had to know their schedules.
So
He mentioned that his great aunt, or his
my mother's great aunt.
mother's great aunt was Mabel Morris, who was the victim in 1924. She operated the
So
store.
everybody had the theory.
Right.
Well, they ended up losing their farm in the Depression, so they moved away. But everybody was afraid over there.
Now, one of the Morris sons, and this is one of the tangents that you need to pull me back on, but one of the Morris sons went to Rochester Music, he was a really good musician, and it may have been the one that they were going to listen to that night on the radio.
If you look at those crime scenes, everybody walked over everything.
If
It was a mess.
you don't mind seeing a photo, I'll pass it around. If you find it objectionable, pass it on to the next. But
I
I'll
think
send
they
it
just
around.
put the Linden Murders away at the land office. But they got all the stuff in there.
They had Miss Kimball's dress, and if you notice, there is a piece of the dress missing, or her undergarments missing. Back in 1922, they did check for semen because there was evidence.
The bullets there are pistol bullets, they're not rifle bullets. And they were thrown all over. I don't know.
Sure, I'd ask the deputy sheriff and where I live, can a 32 caliber pistol and rifle fire the same type of shell? He said yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Just 2 follow-up connection questions. The sister to Tom Whaley
Right, Jane Lyons.
basically said, geez, if you're going to...
That's a theory I came up with.
Okay.
Was that's why I think Jane, why Hattie was killed first. Now, if you go through some of the older newspapers, within a year she was contesting the will. She was in court saying, I'm entitled to this because Hattie was, so the coroner had to determine who was killed first. And she wanted to know so she could go after what was out there.
That would mean she knew who committed the
Oh,
murder
yeah,
and was
absolutely.
actually complicit in it.
Yeah. Just one of our friends in London happens to live in her house now, so.
This is Maud, who lives, I'm hearing it from Paris. Maud lives in Linden,
Okay.
right across the street from some of the action,
Okay.
and knows something.
Downhill from the accident. My neighbor.
Can you stand up? Can you stand up?
My
Here,
neighbor,
then
Mr.
they'll do
Mauthausen.
this.
He was a teenager at the time.
What was his name?
Dick Mauthausen, Richard
Oh, sure, Madison. Sure, I know May. I know May. May
Yeah, my
Lombardi,
neighbor's
sure.
my neighbor.
Yeah.
So she has told me many times, showing me photos of women
And everyone here?
grew up there,
No.
that
No,
her
that's why lawyers
father
stand up.
had been told by
Yep.
the suspect, if you talk, I will
Absolutely.
kill you too.
Right.
And he took that to his grave.
Right. We put
Petrified.
we did an interview a couple years ago with the Buffalo News, and Dan Herbeck, who did the book on Oklahoma City bomber, came out with a piece on us. We interviewed May, and she told us this story, and I'm going to have to borrow somebody here. At that point, my suspect was living in Attica and working at Westinghouse. You know where the train depot was in Attica? Okay, right on Favor Street. It's kind of the front door of Westinghouse. The kids used to have to get off at that depot and walk to the Prospect School, maybe 2.5 blocks away. May was telling us that again and again, every time, I think her father's was Richard? Richard. He would get off the train and somebody says, what do you know about the Linden murders? What's going on? Don't say nothing. What are they saying? And this kid was a young kid. And he'd scurry away. And May said, it wasn't until I read your book, now I know what Dad was talking about. But he was working there at Westinghouse and he watched the people come in from Linden. I'm going to pass this photo around. If you don't want to see it.
It's gory.
It's gory.
It's gory. There's a lot of photos I wouldn't even look at.
This is looking into the bedroom at the way the house. There were three windows. Make up one face. Three of them. Stuffed underneath. One photo that shows the door on Thompson. He's going to come back I'm going to wrap it up with one thing, and I'll take up all kinds of questions. Remember, it's my bedtime now. 7 things, then I'm done. Okay. After the Benjamin Phillips murder in 1924, there was an active warrant put out for my suspect and his wife. They were to come in for questioning. I found that going through a stack of newspapers, that there was a warrant put out for them. We just come in for questioning. My suspect said, I'll talk to you, but first I want to talk to my doctor. This name had propped up a bunch of times in a lot of the stuff I'd read, and it was a very prominent Attica doctor. My suspect, after consultation, agreed to commit himself to the Rochester Psychiatric for 10 days worth of observation. 10 days later, it shows him getting out, having had his appendix removed. What did he go up there for? He agreed to go for psychiatric observation, but had his appendix removed. A day before that, before he committed himself, an anonymous letter arrived at a district attorney's office saying they knew who the killer was, and that they weren't going to say anything because they were afraid that they were going to get killed. Well, yeah, it kind of makes a lot of sense, So all things remained quiet for Pierre De Beers.
So they never came in?
Huh?
They never brought him in?
They brought him in for questioning.
Oh, they didn't send him in?
Yeah. He agreed to turn himself in to go to Rochester Psychiatric Hospital for observation.
Right, and then he came out.
With only having his appendix removed.
Right, and then what happened?
Everything was quiet. From what I understood, everything stayed nice and quiet. It stayed nice and quiet because from all the notes I've read, he was under constant surveillance by the troopers, by local guys, everybody who could watch him watched him. It was until 1951. His wife died. Before she died, she held an auction and sold everything in the house. So this guy was essentially living in a little house with nothing in it for about 7 years. In 1958, he was involuntarily committed to Rochester Psych, and he died there in 1960. He's buried in Attica. Now,
It was involuntary?
involuntary by the court in Wyoming County. And again, I kept writing to the Mark. Dad was a judge living in Attica at that time. I said, come on, go drive by our house every day, let me need some of this stuff, you know? And little by little, he told me some stuff, but he won't tell me. I wanted to know why he was, what was used to garner the hospitalization. You're not going to tell me. A couple other things here, and I'll take all the questions you might have. So once I compiled everything, I did what was called a null hypothesis. I set out to prove that my suspect didn't do it. I set out to prove that one of the other suspects did do it. And you know what? I couldn't do it. I couldn't prove that my guy was not guilty. So then once I proved the null hypothesis negative, I took what I had, sent it off to a guy who worked for the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, ran a TV show for a while. He did a basic criminal profile. It says, my criminal profile and your psych profile match up. I think you got the right guy. I said, okay. Well, I wasn't done. And just an interesting little side note here. Everybody who was familiar with my suspect, family, friends, there were a total of 7 individuals who died oddly, including 2 brothers. A brother died of hiccups and the other one got hit by a train. He had a sister commit suicide by walking into Cayuga Lake. That young baby said his wife was pregnant in March of 1924. I never found a birth certificate or death certificate. And in 1937, the district attorney who investigated Benjamin Phillips' murder shot himself in the heart with a pistol, 32 caliber pistol. I was going through the notes, and when James Kelly came back as a district attorney, one of the questions he asked, written on the note, was the pistol used by Neville to commit suicide, the Linden murder pistol? That told me no one knew where that was. So I've always had questions as to whether that pistol in the Holland Land Office actually had anything to do with it. I don't know. Further notes showed that a deputy sheriff for Genesee County had tossed that pistol into the Genesee River. I think that's in the second book. I said, wait a minute. Genesee River, why wouldn't he go down to the Tonawanda and toss it there? Why drive to the Genesee? So there's a lot of open questions. Still, hopefully I'll answer in the cider maker next year. I think that's what I had, but I'll take all your questions. Yes, sir.
Somebody was so scared of that guy, and they didn't have all this VA and stuff like that.
Right.
Why didn't somebody just bump him off?
Question, please?
Like he was
She asked, why didn't somebody just kill the guy? Well, that makes a lot of sense. All these odd accidents, well, just show them in front of the 715. Right? Oh, that's all right. That's a good question. There was no DNA, fingerprinting. Remember, everything was set on fire, so any damage to the prints had already been done. But in that picture,
nobody would have cared.
Nobody would have cared. He also wore gloves all the time. So that was...
And police work wasn't that good at that time, right?
No, and remember 1917, the state troopers were just starting out. They were brand spanking new, and they had to rely often on private investigators out of the cities or homicide bureaus out of Buffalo. This one detective came out in 1934, took a look at the Phillips crime scene. You had a man whose head was caved in, he was set on fire, and said, it was an accident. He was killed by one of the tiles crashing his skull in. Ceiling tile. And he goes back to Rochester. That was his conclusion. So, nobody believed these guys. They had no reason to believe it. So, no credibility. Yeah. Anything? Yes.
I know there's other books talking about this. Does your theory kind of coincide with some of the other theories?
I know one just came out. We've done a couple of signings with a young one. Hers is a novel that just came out. Bill Brown was the only other one I knew that had read it. And his was pretty much just a compilation of the guys.
I've read it.
As far as I know, I'm the only one that came out with it. Yeah, and it just came out, maybe a month, 2 months ago.
Shadow by the Bridge.
Yeah.
The night of the Whaling murders, is that the same night that the lady who owned the grocery store was?
Yeah.
How did that come to be?
How did she get murdered?
Yeah.
Okay. My time frames might be off by a couple minutes here and there. She was supposed to, MA's not on the waist. Supposed to go for milk. and she never came back. If you look at her face, and it's in one of the books, severely damaged around the bridge of the nose and the face. If he had a weapon, it was a rifle, because I think he needed something to cut and crush. So you could fire the rifle, cut with the brass fixtures, and crush with the butt. I think that's what happened.
But the theory is that he encountered her after he killed them.
She had already killed Hattie and Tom. She came in looking for them, smelled smoke, saw what was going on. That was it.
If you didn't know they were human beings, you would recognize them.
No, and there's one photo that you don't recognize.
Those crime scenes are bad.
They're quite bad, yeah.
So you think it's possible that's why he was waiting for her, and that's why he sat and had the ham sandwich or whatever?
No, I believe he was, there's a picture of their dining room going around. They were killed in the bedroom, or the parlor. You had the bedroom, the parlor, and the kitchen. The theory that I'm operating off came from the troopers, that he was standing near the wall by the door as she came in. He heard the back. Yeah.
So, with your experience and background, do you think people that behave that way are something born that way? And or do you think that maybe in his background he was abused or whatever that made him act out? I'm just curious about that.
That's
you know,
very
what you're
good.
feeling.
I can give you an opinion.
Yeah.
I think they probably are born that way some way.
Yeah.
And it takes a trigger, whether it be being susceptible to abuse.
It's like you're kind of born and something
goes
The way the insurance ads on a paper. I've seen a thing or two, so I'm.
What about his father? You talked about his mother's
My
house,
wife,
what about
I've
his
seen
father?
things.
His father died, I want to say 1909. You know,
Right.
kind of hands-off situation. Oh, man, this was the big one. I have to tell you this. In Twisted Tree, that's the whole reason I wrote that book, was I believe there were 3 co-conspirators. Yeah. 2 women, one being his wife, the other being his sister Julia, and one being his doctor from Attica.
Yes.
They all knew what was going on.
His ex-client that was still a client and patient.
Yeah,
You know.
you can say nothing.
Privilege and you can't say anything,
Right.
even
So that's how I developed the case in the second book, is they knew what was going on. The reason the doctor didn't say anything, if he had accused either his wife or sister, I believe those women would have gone to the electric chair.
Is there a marriage certificate from when he was married the first time?
No, I didn't bring that here. There is one I got from Erie County on the second marriage. The name of his wife, and in the second book I do a handwriting comparison with a marriage license and that anonymous letter to Dad. Thank you. I see that just for a second.
Absolutely, I already got you to sign up.
Yeah, sign it, that's I'm not going to show you the name of the suspect, but the name of his wife is Lorraine on one line and Louise on the other. So either she didn't know her own name, the clerk had no idea who she was dealing with, or the prime suspect didn't know who he was marrying. One of those.
But you haven't found him on a marriage certificate who might have been married to Ruth, whoever she was.
No, and I am developing that for the next book, but it's going back to Michigan, the state of Michigan for that. So I got to find where in Michigan, because the family was in Grand Rapids. So, yes.
That I bring this to read.
We can't hear you, and if you would just stand up.
I just wanted to say, can you stand up? My mother-in-law was a witness. May I read?
Sure.
You want to just repeat what you said?
That her mother-in-law was a witness, and she has something here.
My mother-in-law was Lucille Carr, and when she was born on Francis Road, off of Francis Road, Putnam Settlement Road. You all know where this is? You probably know it better than I do because I didn't grow up here. But before she died, we encouraged her to write her recollections and smidgens of family lore and history. And one of the things, one paragraph that she wrote was the following. She had sort of picked me and made me sit in the car with her a lot. And she'd say, okay, now turn here, turn there, because I want to show you where, the one-room schoolhouse was, or this is the route that we took to my relatives on Swing Road, under buffalo blankets to get to Thanksgiving. And for some reason, it was important to her to make sure I knew all these things. And I was lucky she did. But this is what she wrote. In 1917, I was 10 years old. Actually, she wasn't. She was 12. Women always lie about their age, A tragic event occurred. Back then, I often babysat for my little cousin, Esther Spires. Anybody know where that was?
I'm
Spires?
certainly familiar with the name.
Yeah, me too, because it was a relative, but I don't know which house it was. Whose home was a short distance from ours. One day, while I was in the yard with Esther and her mother, Adelaide, we noticed a swarthy-looking man walking up the narrow road that led past the Spires' house toward a house on the hill. Behind the man was a woman dressed in a black coat and a purple hat. We just assumed that the couple was headed for the house on the hill. Eventually, the pair must have turned left into a group of trees. When the owner of the woods entered the grove a short time later to get some lumber, he came across a terrible sight. The woman had been brutally murdered. He notified the authorities, and they organized a posse of men, including my father, to look for clues. My cousin Adelaide and I were summoned to the jail to identify the black coat and purple hat. To this day, however, neither the murdered woman nor her assailant has been identified. This murder mystery was later written about in a book by Bill Brown. Now, Lucille died in 2000, and she had written this in her late 80s, early 90s.
That's very good. I have a general idea what the Spires' home is, or was.
Well, I know where her home was, and she said it was, just up the road from her house. And Sandy and I tried to figure out, but not knowing also where the Spires' house is, but somebody's got to know where the Spires'
I can give you my best guess, because Kendra and I have driven through there 1,000 times trying to figure it out ourselves. You got
that means it's not East Bethany Road.
If it's Route 63,
no.
right?
No. We're not on East Bethany Road or Bethany Center Road. She's identifying this as being on Putnam Settlement Road or on Francis Road, which runs, Route 63 is way back behind you, and Bethany Center Road is the other way.
What I had put in the book was a map drawn by the troopers at that time. Francis Road.
Do you know where, like when we come from across Silver Road, number 20, and we go straight and then you usually turn? If you stay straight, it will take you by that bar when you go into the thing.
Oh, okay, all right.
You know it, I know you know.
Any more questions? We got to wrap it. Yes, I'm sorry.
The murderer's name is still local.
Yes.
Have you gone to any of them to
There
ask
are-
if they have any history?
There are no known relatives. A son died in Ohio maybe 5 years ago. Their sister he lived with in Linden had no children. One sister lived in Batavia. The last name Miller, married name Miller. I've received no complaints, no judgments, no attorneys knock on my door, which is a good thing,
Are there any living relatives left?
Of my suspect? No, not direct direct line. He had his last son died in Ohio. I don't want to give too much, but he was rather prominent in the Alexander area for a while.
Could you also let everyone know where they can get the books because of that I'm asking?
In the picture with the game on the
Yeah.
tracks, is he the one standing just to the right of the man with the head circle?
Yes.
He is.
He is. Now, it also looked like his body was deformed as well. The lower part, the lower section of his body.
He had to be
He had a different head, sure. You can see how his body seems almost a bit deformed in the waist line. Whether he was resting his foot, but it was something that he was born with. Yeah, that's in there.
So when is the next one out?
Oh, wow. Nobody's going to ask me about the two I got coming up this year? There's going to be a small piece coming out in Batavia Daily next few days. I'm writing, or just finishing up a book on the USS the Sullivans, Weekend with George. It's on a ship up in the Buffalo Naval Park, the Sullivans, and named after the 5 Sullivan brothers. Supposedly that ship has been haunted by George. So the Navy Park has allowed me to spend some evenings up there. So
I'm not going to that either.
I'm going to be experiencing some of that, but I'm also telling the history of the ship. Now, a big part of the story is that the ship that the Sullivans were on, the Juno, was lost for 7 years, and they just found it on St. Patrick's Day. There was a kid from Attica on that. So the newspaper is going to be introducing you to Eugene Straub, gunners made on the USS Juno.
So Rob, this is absolutely wonderful.
Great. Nice
And
crowd.
we've all
Thanks for
enjoyed
coming.
it, and we all seem to have something. We want to invite all of you to stay around, and I think you'll all congregate around this man and his wife. And if you have any other stories or any other questions, you want to make sure you hit him with them, because who knows when you'll see him next time. So please join us for refreshments, and please come again to Stafford Historical Society. And the museum is open in case you would like to go in and look around.
Yeah, I started reading them right after Christmas when she gave them to me, and I wanted This was bought in December.
This is what the troopers were reading, and it was a local guy.